Hello YouTube, our adventure today comes to you from Mount Magazine State Park in Western Arkansas. It's the highest place in Arkansas. So I'm going to be reading to you today, still from Pinky, episode 18, chapter 14. And hopefully we'll get this posted on Tuesday. But I hope you guys are having a wonderful time, and I hope you enjoy the wonderful view behind me. Chapter 14, The Real Monster. I raced home every day from school to play with Annabelle Lee. Billy Joe loved that baby as much as me. He came over on Sundays to play with Annie. He broke down and bawled the first time she laughed for him. He's not going to keep her. He knows she can't stay in his room in Mr. Gosling's barn. There's too much smoke and no one to take care of her while he works. He does love her. One Sunday, he walked to our house during a storm to spend time with her. That year, spring storms followed one right after the other. Some days, the lightning got so bad, Pa wouldn't let Elmer and me do outside chores. Being that kind of lazy made my tummy sick. I didn't want Pa doing my work. The storms made the air feel funny, hot and sticky and dangerous. A twister tore up the edge of Leaking Rock. 6 buildings were damaged. Mr. Kruger corrected everyone he heard calling it a twister. He insisted it was a cyclone. One Saturday, Mr. Gates showed up. He stormed as bad as the weather. Huge clouds had piled up southwest of the house. I didn't know what southwest meant when I learned that bad storms came from there. I thought maybe the devil's house was called southwest. I knew if I asked about it, the devil would come after me. If the storm was off to one side or other, we were in the clear. But southwest meant we had to keep our eyes open. That day, I had Annie outside with me. At 4 months old, she still couldn't walk or even sit up by herself. She didn't have any teeth, and she wet all over herself and whoever happened to be holding her. I was ready for her to grow up a little bit. She laughed so cute. I couldn't be mad at her when she let out one of her baby giggles. I did get tired of being peed on. Mr. Gates walked straight up to our front door and banged on it. Annie jumped and I almost dropped her. I'd seen him coming and I had eased us girls into the barn. I nearly cried, I was so scared. It would have been better if Pa or Elmer had been home. Pa was fixing fence and Elmer had a job in town fetching and carrying for Mr. Gosling for a couple of weeks. Mr. Gosling was trying to teach Billy Joe how to be a blacksmith. And he had made himself a giant hook like mine for catching fish. I didn't like it, but I didn't figure my opinion should count since he made it his own self. He didn't fish by our house, though. He only fished near town. I hoped he wouldn't catch my big fish, or even one like it. Elmer ran errands and did easy jobs like hold this or quench that. He says he wants to be a wild horse wrangler, not a blacksmith. He's saving his money to buy horse catching ropes and stuff. Mr. Gates stormed in like an evil red thundercloud. His face turned nearly purple and splotchy. His whole body jerked from one side to the other as he slammed his feet on the ground. Dust blew up with every step. I thought his feet would break through our porch, he stomped so hard. I don't know as if I've ever seen him walk normal. He always stomped his feet. The one hand he had left stayed curled into a fist most of the time. Mr. Gates banged his stump against the door over and over. Ma come around the corner of the house just as Mr. Gates opened the door for himself. She pulled her pistol out the laundry basket. I could hear the hammer click back from where I peeked through a knothole. Ma didn't say anything that I could hear. Her mouth didn't even move. She tipped her head once toward his horse. He took a step toward her and she lined that pistol up with his head. He yelled and cursed, but he stopped sudden-like and he nearly tipped over. It felt like forever before he climbed on his horse and rode off spewing threats. Ma never even looked my way. She eased that hammer back down and took her basket of clean laundry back around the house to finish hanging it. I almost came out of the barn. Annie started fussing, so I jiggled her and jiggled her and jiggled her, and she forgot to whine. Fussing is her way of staying awake when she should be napping. I had to jiggle her a long time to make her stay quiet. She finally dozed off. Just as I got to the barn door, Rufus come thundering in on his horse. He bellowed and hollered about nobody keeping him from his kinfolk. He yanked his rifle from his scabbard and headed to our front door. He barged right into our house without even knocking. I didn't know Ma had gone in the house, but Rufus come stumbling out backwards, his head covered in flour. He coughed and choked worse than I did when I drank that whiskey that tasted like Mr. Kruger's nasty breath. Rufus dropped his rifle on our porch, and I heard another thump, and he landed flat on his back in the dirt. Ma's best cast iron kettle landed right next to him. I'd never seen her throw it before, but I knew what had to have happened. She knocked out his paw with a skillet when they were being ugly at Mr. Harkin's house. Today she used her kettle to take out the sun. I listened for more hoofbeats, but I didn't hear any. The wind had kicked up and dust blew everywhere, even without anyone stomping in it. I knew Ma and I would be sweeping and cleaning tomorrow. Ma strolled to the barn and leaned against the door. She stood there staring at that awful Rufus. I snuck close to her and scratched on the inside of the wall so she'd know I was there. She whispered, "You girls stay quiet in there if you can. That'll be a help. I've got a feeling Mr. Gates will be back any second." I looked around, and sure enough, I could see his outline where he snuck up behind the barn. His shape showed between the cracks, in the cracks between the boards as he sneaked along. I whispered back, "He's behind the barn. What do I do?" "Do your best to keep Annie away from him." I remembered Elmer hiding him and me in the haystack at Mr. Harkin's barn. It worked then. It should work now. I climbed into Patch's manger and pulled the hay over us to hide us. Our mangers hold enough hay for the milk cow to eat for a week or more. They're big and deep, and I can lay down easy in them. Pa built a little box on one side where he puts grain when he needs a horse or a cow to stand still. Sweat beaded up and ran down Annie's fat baby neck. I dragged more straw to cover us. I got hot in a hurry. I wanted to listen to Mr. Gates and Ma. I wanted to run and get Pa. I wanted to run and get Elmer. And Ma didn't want to kill anybody else. I knew that. She and I had talked about having to kill the bandits who had murdered her Charles Pitkin. Those souls weighed heavy on her heart. She allowed us how letting them live to ruin other lives would have been a bigger burden to carry, though. Nothing I wanted to do was more important right then than keeping Annie quiet. If Mr. Gates figured out where our baby was, he'd try to get her. If he couldn't take her away, he'd probably set the barn on fire. I never seen anyone as mean as him. I cried. I couldn't help it. I cried quiet because I didn't want Mr. Gates to hear, but I'd never been so scared. My chest nearly caved in and my heart just slammed around inside of me. I couldn't get enough air. I'd have given up being the governor if it would have gotten rid of Mr. Gates and Rufus. I'd seen firsthand how horrible they were to Mr. Harkin. I didn't want them bashing in my head with a rock. My whole body shook, but I didn't make a sound. I barely even jiggled the hay. A long time later, I woke up. Annie twitched like she might wake up too. I patted her and she settled back. I heard Pa calling my name and Ma's name. I tried to crawl out of the manger without waking Annie, but Annie loves Pa. She heard his voice and went to kicking and jabbering and trying to talk to him. I stumbled out of the barn carrying that pea-soaked baby. When Pa saw us, he took Annie and me straight to the well. He pulled up a bucket of water and dumped half of it on my head. I spluttered and choked, but that water felt good. I hadn't realized how miserable hot I was until he cooled me off sudden-like. Then he gave me a dipper full of it to drink. I drank the whole thing in half of a second one. You were too hot. He petted me and he touched my head and my hands until he was satisfied that I had cooled off. What about the baby? Pa chuckled. She's already soaking wet head to toe. Half sweat and half she did it to herself. You were nearly dry. Where's Ma? My face must have told him the worst of the story, and I told him the rest of it. He headed to the back of the barn to track Mr. Gates. Mr. Gates, Rufus, and Ma's tracks led off to the southeast. He found where they'd had their horses tied. He came racing back to me. Pinky, I have to get Ma back. You and Elmer stay here and keep each other and that baby safe. He hugged Annie and me together. Take care of my girls. I nodded, but my eyebrows squeezed nearly together. Your brother will be home soon. I'm going after your Ma. We might not make it back tonight. Don't worry. Do your best. It will be enough. Tell Elmer everything. He knows where I keep the spare pistol. I know too. I don't want you or your brother to have to kill anyone, but be prepared. Maybe it shouldn't have, but it made me feel so proud that he thought I could kill anyone who needed it. So I just nodded at him. He got that serious face that he uses when something might go wrong. Pinky, I might not make it back today. Well, I didn't want that to be true. My mind jumped to wondering if he'd be back the next day. I squashed that thought like a stink bug. We'll see you tomorrow then. He got down on one knee in front of me. He held my face in his hands. I love you, kids. I love your Ma. That storm, he pointed to the clouds building in the southwest. That storm will wipe out their tracks. I don't dare wait till Elmer gets home. I may not make it back for a long time. I'm not leaving Ma with them. But what do we do? Me and Elmer and Annie are just kids. What are we supposed to do till you get back? I couldn't remember a single day when I didn't have somebody else to take care of me. All you can do is your best. It will be enough. He kissed my cheek, and the next thing I knew, he and Patches disappeared over the ridge. I sat on the porch holding Annie till Elmer got home. I should have done something, but I didn't do anything besides sit and get sprinkled on with the rain that blew in under our porch roof. I couldn't think of anything but losing Ma and Pa. Maybe I grew up a little bit. I couldn't even yell at God. I cried though. I know God heard that. Ma says he hears our hearts when our mouths don't know the right words. Elmer come galloping home from town. He ran harder than when he's winning the Independence Day races. He is the fastest boy in school. I heard him yelling, but I didn't understand what he was saying. Running and yelling at the same time messes up what you mean. Turns out he was telling me to run for the root cellar. He pointed off to the southwest. I saw that twister coming straight from the devil. It flicked out first one way, then the other, but it headed straight at me. I tucked Annie's little head against my shoulder and ran for the Freddy hole. I went as deep as I could get into the side of the hill and squatted down on the floor. Elmer didn't follow me. My heart pounded so loud I couldn't tell if the storm made any noise or not. The first storm noise I heard was the wind. It moaned like a ghost trying to scare the soul out of my body. Then the ghost got angry. I didn't know wind could really shriek. It did, louder than a train whistle, and it growled too. It roared like a train coming in too fast. Elmer finally staggered into the shelter carrying nearly everything we owned. He had taken time to wrap my new blue dress around my treasure box. He had all of Annie's clothes stuffed in Ma's sewing basket and a few tools and the spare pistol. He'd even grabbed my favorite cup. I don't know how he thought of all of that. Maybe him and Pa had talked about how to survive a tornado or a cyclone. I needed to ask somebody which one it was. I knew when the rain lost out to the hail, it sounded like the devil was having a conniption fit. When it started hailing, it got cold fast. Annie's chubby little behind dripped. Elmer made me change her clothes, and then he led us deeper into the side of the hill around a corner I hadn't seen. He lit the lantern then. I carried that baby, and we went deeper and deeper into a cave that God had made. We barely sat down on some wide dirt benches that Pa and Elmer made when the horrible noise reached down through the dirt and grabbed us. It made my heart hurt. The noise made the lantern go out. Annie cried, and Elmer grabbed both of us and just held on. I couldn't think of anything except the cave falling in on us. I couldn't breathe. The storm squeezed all the air out of the world. I laid my head on Elmer's shoulder and gave him the whole problem. I knew it wasn't fair. Sleeping in the barn while the gates of Stole Ma hadn't been fair either. Guilt made me want to run out into the storm so the devil could kill me easier. I must have cried myself to sleep because I woke up laying on the bench where I'd been sitting earlier. Elmer had built a fire. He covered me up with my blue dress. He and Annie were talking to each other. He leaned against the cave wall and pulled his knees up. She sat on his tummy, leaning back against his legs. The firelight caught his smile. I will remember that smile forever. Annie yelled at him and waved her little fists. They both laughed. Then she yelled some more, and every time she yelled, they both laughed. I wondered if I was too stupid to get the joke. What's so funny? Elmer laughed again. Come look at her. She is tattling on her Grandpa Gates. I made my way to where I could see her. I sat next to Elmer and leaned against him. She held her breath and then waved her little fists in the air and yelled and hollered. She looked just like her grandpa. That time I laughed too, even though seeing his fury on her tiny face was scarier than it was funny. Thank you for being along for this adventure. We love you guys. We'll see you later. Remember, God loves you more than I do. Mwah. Bye.